All right, welcome to the Week 1 Forum. This week we're looking at the course introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the basics of American federal government, kind of the building blocks that you need to have a beginning understanding of before the rest of the stuff can really be introduced. Uh, One of the things that's very important is this idea of citizenship, of what it means to belong to a political community. We oftentimes think that citizenship brings with it certain kinds of privileges. It also brings with it responsibility. And one of the most important kinds of responsibilities that we all have is the need for political knowledge. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to help you guys get as you enter into, I mean, for those of you who are true, concurrent students or freshmen, even for those of you who are non-traditional students, it's important to keep in mind this idea of political knowledge. And how do you develop political knowledge? Well, first of all, as a citizen, you have to understand the basic constitutional principles guiding our government. And you also have to be responsible in terms of keeping yourself informed. And this is where, this is one of the big challenges that we have in this country today. Fully, a third to almost 40% of Americans fundamentally don't trust uh, the mainstream media, the main television networks. They don't trust the Washington Post. They don't trust the New York Times, and so they get all their news from news sites, from aggregators, and from other sites that don't often adhere to journalistic principles. And one of the key principles of journalism is, again, transparency of where the information is coming from and accountability in terms of, how facts are checked, that there is fact checking going on in reporting. And so one of the problems that we have is that we have a large percentage of our fellow citizens who are resistant to you know to reality to some extent, and that's a real problem. Uh, One of the important things that I remember from this chapter is this idea of identity. What does it mean to be an American? And of course, historically, that has meant people who look like me, people who are white, people who are largely male. This has been a very masculine country, for most of our history. But our identity is very rapidly undergoing change. And so a lot of people are very uncomfortable about that. And that is, of course, understandable. When you're raised to think that you are part of, quote unquote, the majority, and suddenly you find yourself losing that sense of status, that sense of innate dignity, it leads to fear. That people worry that with the loss of majority status, that white people will lose that essential sense of dignity, of recognition of our worth as citizens. And that is something that we have to confront, and we have to be sensitive to that, even as we acknowledge the past discrimination and subordination of other Americans. So that is a tricky, situation to try and navigate, and we need to be aware of that and sensitive to it. It's also important to keep in mind sort of the core American values. We believe in liberty, equality, and democracy, and these three things are sort of central. That I would hope to think that most Americans agree, and have a consensus around the ideas of liberty and equality, and the fact that we ought to go through democratic procedures. Um, what does liberty mean? It means, to some extent, freedom from constraint. A lot of people equate it with the idea of autonomy, that we should have a right to form our own life plans and pursue them with as little regulation from the outside as possible. How is that notion of liberty, how does it fit with the idea of equality? Well, equality, I mean, at minimum, means that we all should be treated equally under the law, right? It means that my status as a white person should not privilege or render me immune from accountability if I break the law. And then of course, you have the idea of democracy, which essentially is what? It typically is a decision rule that says that the majority should govern in most important decisions. Um, how do these three things mesh together? Liberty and equality can oftentimes create problems for one another. Some people say, well, everybody has to be equal, at all costs. Socialists generally say all outcomes should be equal regardless of talent, which creates a lot of frustration for those people who are talented and who do want to succeed beyond what other people want. But also liberty, there are some people who want to use their liberty to discriminate against others. The great British Latvian philosopher Isaiah Berlin was fond of Russian proverbs, and he said, one of his proverbs was, "Freedom for the wolf is death for the sheep." And that's why we have government, right? That's why we need government to prevent those sorts of things from happening. And of course, on January 6th, you had this horrific event where a mob of angry supporters of Donald Trump basically engaged in an act of insurrection and broke into the Capitol building where Congress was engaged in certifying the electoral results of the past November election, obviously in an attempt to stop that process and to, in my view, what I think it's logical to assume that the people that planned this wanted to keep Donald Trump in power. That raises serious questions about some Americans' commitment to democracy. And I think that's something we have to be honest about and discuss in this class. So if you need any guidance on how to deal with the forums, please feel free to ask questions in the forum. I consider that to be a legitimate form of participation. And please try to avoid these comments like, "Oh, wow, what a great comment. You really cleared things up for me." You're not advancing the discussion when you do that. And aside from mutually complimenting one another, which I believe in compliments, I like compliments, but let's substantively engage with one another. Let's identify those parts of the chapters that we really want to tussle with and chew on and get a better understanding of. So again, if you have any questions, you can ask in the forum. You can email me outside the forum. All perfectly legitimate.